Hello fellow cyborgs and welcome to another Brontë Binge 2019 video. Today I am talking about The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which I recently reread. This is the second time I've read this novel, so the first time I've reread it. I first read it the year before last. I could have looked up the date, but I decided not to and decided to talk about it anyway. This is one of the two novels published by Anne Brontë, and this was the second novel that she published. This is so far the only novel of hers that I have read. This is a frame narrative. You first follow Gilbert, who is a young man. He's like about 24. His father is dead, so he now runs the farm. He has a younger brother and a younger sister and his mother to look after. And this mysterious widow, Mrs. Graham, moves into the neighborhood. She moves into Wildfell Hall with her young son Arthur. And of course, the whole town is abuzz with trying to figure out exactly who she is, exactly where she's from, and all of her circumstances. They're being a little bit nosy. Mrs. Graham is reserved and private to the point of rudeness in their eyes. And I think Gilbert, who kind of wants to rebel but doesn't know how, decides that she is the coolest chick in town. So he starts hanging around her, and one thing leads to another. She eventually hands him her diary to explain everything that happened to her before coming to Wildfell Hall, and that is the second volume, or the second chunk of this book, is her diary entries about her past. And then toward the end we come back to Gilbert, resume the story in the current time period. So that's the plot synopsis. If you want to know as little as like the Victorians when this book was first published, but I think that you should know what else this book is about in order for me to properly talk about it. So let me kind of talk through the non-spoiler, my thoughts and feelings that aren't tied with the potential extra spoilery information. And then the latter half of this video will be talking about things a little bit more in depth for those who've already read this or don't care to kind of know one of the main themes that you don't know going in. So this rereading experience was quite interesting. The first time I read this, I came in with super high expectations. I had heard many a booktuber say this is secretly the best book by the Brontes, or this is their favorite book by the Brontes. This is amazing. This is so feminist. It is just a masterpiece of work of art. It also has diary entries, and I was just like on such a high about it, but was really disappointed that the epistolary section was pretty much just a narrative form, but with chapter breaks of dates instead of anything else. And also with it being in the first person, it didn't feel like a diary entry. It kind of annoyed me, the like lack of like realistic diary entries. I also thought that Gilbert was kind of a shit, and Mrs. Graham was a very cold, rigid sort of character that I did not care about. It was a much like gloomier book. It was kind of hard to get through. I just wasn't super impressed. I gave it 3 stars. So knowing what this actually is definitely helped me enjoy this a lot more. Rereading it too, I picked up on so much more subtlety of the character of Gilbert and Mrs. Graham. I saw them more as well-rounded individuals rather than just these like stick people inhabiting the story. I also really saw their evolution as people and their growth throughout the events of the novel, and then also for Mrs. Graham, the events in her diary. I also was able to pick up on the side characters who were really freaking adorable. There's this party scene. Let me find it. Okay, so there are these 2 bits in chapter 4 called The Party, which just tickled me to no end. My mother, Gilbert's talking, my mother, as usual, was cheerful and chatty, full of activity and good nature, and only faulty in being too anxious to make her guests happy, thereby forcing several of them to do what their soul abhorred in the way of eating or drinking, sitting opposite the blazing fire, or talking when they would be silent. Nevertheless, they bore it very well, being all in their holiday humors. Adorable. And then we also have Richard Wilson, Jane's younger brother, sat in a corner apparently good-tempered, but silent and shy, desirous to escape observation, but willing enough to listen and observe. And although somewhat out of his element, he would have been happy enough in his own quiet way if my mother could only have let him alone, but in her mistaken kindness, she would keep persecuting him with her attentions, pressing upon him all manner of viands, under the notion that he was too bashful to help himself, and obliging him to shout across the room his monosyllabic replies to the numerous questions and observations by which she vainly attempted to draw him into conversation. I mean, like, that's me at a party, 100%. I am Richard Wilson. Just leave me. I'm fine. I'm good. I like this corner. It's my favorite. So yeah, I definitely did not pick up on that at all the first time I read this, and this time it was just a lot more enjoyable. Just all this like extra flavor outside of just Gilbert and Mrs. Graham. There's so much more there to enjoy. So I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say that's non-spoilery at all. I just enjoyed this so much more on the second reread. I don't think I can tell you why this book is so great without telling you about the sneaky, secretive middle section, but there is just a lot to find in here. I think you should go in with tempered expectations, but I think if you're not expecting the moon, you will be really happy with what you find here. Now, if you want to stick around and hear more about that middle section, the secretive middle section, then please, by all means, but if you really want to know nothing but like what the Victorians knew, then you should leave now and I'll see you in another video. So those of you who stayed don't care to know Mrs. Graham's secret. So Mrs. Graham's secret is that she is married to this asshole of a person, alcoholic, debaucher named Mr. Huntingdon, and she has fled him because his company is so abusive that she feared for the health of her son. So this reading experience did end up becoming a slog for me. I found that the section from Helen's perspective is just a lot. It's harder to get through. It's more depressing. It's also really difficult to watch Helen, who seems so smart. She's so intelligent. She's worldly. She's witty, and fall for this guy who you can just tell, like the warning signs. I had like a special marking system of warning sign, warning sign. There were like a dozen just in the things that she recounted to us in the diary where it's like, no, it doesn't get better. Don't. But she doesn't listen. And you can understand why she didn't listen, because the other dudes in her life, the other men that she was introduced to in society, are not pretty. They're not young. They don't think she's great in the way that she wants to be thought of as great. So it's like Mr. Huntingdon seemed like this knight in shining armor when actually he's just a frat boy. So that was really hard. And it was also really hard, and this is where I started to slog, when he's being an abusive jerk and she's excusing him. It was really hard to be on board for Helen. It's just like, no, stop it. He's bad. You don't have to make excuses for him. Please don't. So it was like I would read 5 pages and then put this down, and that would be like my reading for the day. It was a really tough couple of weeks. But then eventually, once Helen realizes, oh my gosh, I hate this man. He is like the worst. And you're like, yes, he is. I'm really glad you agree with me now. He is totally the worst. Now let's girl power it through together. So once I got to that point, the like last 150 pages just like blew by. It was so much fun to read. My emotional investment this reading was like 100 times more invested than when I first read it. Helen was a real person who I cared about. Gilbert was a real person, idiot, who I cared about, I guess. I hated people more intensely. I rooted for people more intensely. It was definitely a much more enjoyable reading experience. So I think my overall enjoyment was more of a 3-star read up until like the last 150 pages. I definitely, like I said, had to slog through a lot of this. But I found the ending to be quite feminist, quite modern, actually. And, well, I feel like people are going to come at me. Okay, so if you don't want to hear me talk about the ending, then you should leave now. Second, premature goodbye. Thank you for watching this video so far, but I really want to talk about the ending with you guys who have read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall or don't care to ever read it or don't care to be spoiled. So if you don't want me to talk about the ending, then you should leave. Thank you for watching even more, and I'll check you out in the next video. Well, you'll check me out. I can't see you. Okay, so those of you left are fine with being spoiled for like the very ending. So after Gilbert reads the diary and he's like, oh my gosh, she's the best lady ever. And then Helen leaves and then Gilbert is going to go find her. And it's been like years. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of a Hamlet at that point. It's just like, Gilbert, can you like do something about this situation? I'll just keep assuming things and assuming you're right. So he eventually catches up with Helen. She invites him into her like front sitting room to chat. And they're talking about things and he's talking around things. She's inherited money. He's decided she's like way better social standing wise than me now. I couldn't possibly ask her to marry me now. That would be like an insult. So I'm just going to enjoy these last 20 minutes with her and then leave her forever because no way she would marry me now. And I'm not even going to try. This was Gilbert's thing. So he's thinking this to himself. He's just like doing the worst small talk ever to her verbally. And she opens a window, plucks out a frost-covered rose, and hands it to him. And he is like, what do I do with this? He's like trying to absorb everything while he's feeling tumultuous emotionally. And she reacts to this by clutching the rose and throwing it out the window. And she's just like, if you didn't know what that meant, then you don't get to touch it. And so then he's like, wait, no, it's fine. And he goes out and gets the rose from outside in the snow. And she's like, that rose represents my heart. And if you didn't understand that, if you don't want my heart, then you can just piss off. Cause I'm just like, I can't deal with idiots anymore. Didn't Helen just propose to Gilbert? If Helen didn't do that, if Helen didn't say, I will give you my heart, would you like it? Which is pretty much what people say right before they say, will you marry me? If she hadn't done that, Gilbert would have just walked away. He would never have proposed to her. So in my mind, Helen proposed to Gilbert. And I'm just like, yes, this was like the best. I did not pick up on that the first time I read this. And this makes me so happy. Now, I can understand, and Acacia and I talked about this. I suppose a more like feminist ending would be that Helen doesn't end up with Gilbert. She becomes an independent woman because she hasn't really needed men. They haven't really done her very much good in the past. So she just stays single and she's happy with it. She's got a lovely son. She has prospects. You know, she has friends now. You know, she's a happy camper. I can totally see how that could be a better ending, especially since Gilbert is like proto-Rochester. Like, he's a bit of a douche. Gilbert, again, has this like weird conflation between like violence and romance that a lot of the Brontë heroes have. And it's like not great. Gilbert's not a great dude, but he's like fine. And he does start actively changing his behavior once he reads Helen's diary and he wants to prove that he's worthy of her, and he does regret what he did in the past. He is only 24 and an idiot who's never been challenged. I think he does his best, and more importantly, he, compared to the other men in Helen's life who are not her brother, who's like the only version of a good dude that she's ever seen, who she can't marry, thank goodness. I can understand why Helen is into him. And I want Helen to be happy. And if Helen wants to marry an immature idiot who hopefully will flourish as he ages like a good wine, then more power to you. Helen's heart desire was Gilbert. I accept. You have chosen worse in the past, so I wish you best of luck with him, with your man-child. So I could see, you know, I could understand why you'd be like, I wish she didn't marry Gilbert. He's a bit of an idiot. But I was on board, especially since I think she totally proposed to him, and that's adorable. Okay, so I think I'm finally done talking about the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. If you have sat through this whole video, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Tell me what you thought in the comments. If you sat through this whole video and you haven't read the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I hope you still do. I definitely find that knowing the plots to classics often just enhance my reading experience rather than condemning it, because I'm picking up on like the nuance of the language more and the little details rather than like, what did they say? What's going on? So anyway, there you go. I'm gonna actually stop talking now. Thank you for watching, and until next time, read some Brontë books and continue to be lovely.